ready to interview Dr. Gerald Horne, and we are going to have we have some questions. Dr. Gerald Horne is an African historian who holds the John J. Rebecca Moore's Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. He has done nearly 50 books, and his latest book is Armed Struggle, ? Panthers and Communists, Black Nationalists and Liberals in Southern California through the 60s and 70s. And Dr. Horne, how are you feeling today, sir?
All good. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, Melinda is going to ask you.
Okay, so let's get it started. And what's your further thoughts on the election and Donald J. Trump's win?
Well, first of all, like many, I've been thinking rather deeply about the November 5th, 2024 U.S. election. On a level of generalization, I would say that there's a lot of anger in the Black American community, not surprisingly, since Black American women voted 9-1 against Mr. Trump, men 8-2. If this community had been mirrored in other constituencies, Mr. Trump would be on his way to prison, not the White House. And I think that reflects some very profound aspects of the political culture of the United States. I mean, for example, I have been sharply critiquing Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont for suggesting that a reason why Mr. Trump and the Republicans prevailed is because of so-called identity politics versus class struggle or class and economic questions. The problem with this term identity politics, which I've said numerous times, obviously it's being ignored, is that we're not clear really what it means. Obviously, it doesn't apply to Israel, a state based upon an exclusivist ethno-religious identity, where, by the way, Mr. Sanders used to reside. Apparently doesn't apply to feminism. It may apply to the Black liberation movement. I think they mean it to apply to the trans issue, but in progressive circles, it's considered to be unfashionable, shall we say, to criticize this very distinct minority, although we know that the Republicans, they ran countless ads suggesting that the trans question is really the problem in this country, including the canard that you send little Johnny to school in the morning and your child comes back that afternoon after an operation as little Jennifer, which is obviously ridiculous. It's obviously ludicrous, but as they say in the United States, it bespeaks the low information voter and their preponderance in the electorate. I also think that with regard to the class question, Mr. Sanders and many of his followers are really not being honest. I mean, people should know that the labor movement in this country, the AFL-CIO, has been dominated by class collaboration. There's a recent book, A Blue Collar Empire, that talks about how the AFL-CIO sponsor counter-revolution all over the world. I talk about it in my book, White Supremacy Confronted, for example, when they did the same thing. And then if you look at the deindustrialization question, jobs fleeing to China, as I've said before, the head of the UAW, United Auto Workers, which of course has an affiliation with the Canadian Auto Workers, Leonard Woodcock, was the ambassador to China from the United States at the time when the factories were fleeing. And to a certain degree, the Trump base, they're complaining about what they helped to co-author. That is to say, they supported the anti-communism of the labor movement, which led to depressed wages. They supported the anti-Soviet entente with China, which led to deindustrialization. Many of them supported the Red Scare. Many of our folks in the Black liberation movement, leaders of the NAACP, they supported the overthrow of the influence of Paul Robeson. And so there's not a lot of honesty. Maybe it's not honesty. Maybe it's just ignorance. That may be more likely, because I find in this country people are really ignorant of basic facts. But in any case, there are opportunities that are available to us if we choose to exercise them. That is to say, that the Trump victory represents a weakening of U.S. imperialism. He plans to try to move from double containment of Russia and China to single containment of China, try to work out a deal with Russia. I don't think it's going to work, because why should Russia work out a deal with Washington against the interests of a nation with which it shares a long border? And everybody knows that in 2028, the Russophobic Democrats may come to power and overthrow whatever deal the Republicans enact. So this weakening of U.S. imperialism once again causes me to reassert my proposal, that is to say, a conference in Ottawa and or Havana, with the immediate issue being halting the deportation of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of undocumented Haitian and Mexican workers, with the sideline aspect of being able to gather under one roof, many with grievances against U.S. imperialism. Of course, he says he's going to slap tariffs on the Canadian economy, going to slap tariffs on the European Union economy, going to slap tariffs on the Chinese economy. So there are many openings, but especially the NAACP leadership is not up to the challenge. I passed the message on to the African People's Socialist Party, but I know that Chairman O'Malley is facing sentencing in a few weeks, and I'm not sure if that organization is in a position to follow through. And of course, I passed on messages to the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We shall see what happens. But finally, I have to say that the historians have done a poor job in explaining the United States of America, leading to this absurdity of many Arabs and Muslims in Michigan, right across the border from you folk in Ontario, who voted for Mr. Trump on the premise that he would be better on military issues, imperialism issues, than the Democrats. And of course, his Secretary of Defense designate is a self-professed crusader. He has tattooed on his torso an emblem from these ill-fated extremist Christian Islamophobic crusades of 1,000 years ago. He does not think that the Christians have finished that task. And so you have Muslims in Michigan voting for a crusader to be Secretary of Defense. And once again, the historians have not done a good job with this creation myth of 1776. I think our Canadian friends could have done a better job of pulling our coat and telling us on this side of the border that was basically a myth. But in any case, if we're not careful, we're all going to suffer the consequences of either dishonesty or ignorance.
You're listening to Diasporic music on Diasporic music on you're listening to Diasporic music on Black Power 96. And Melinda, you had another question, right?
Yeah, I mean, let's go into what are the film reviews that you have right now on the deck?
Well, I've been tracking Steve McQueen, Black British Grenadian ancestry. I've watched his documentary, Occupied City, about the Nazi occupation of his home city of today, which is Amsterdam. It's quite a remarkable film. I mean, Amsterdam had a population of about 800,000, about 10% Jewish. Of that 80,000, about 60,000 went down in flames, that is to say, sent to death camps. He tracks that. And one of my takeaways, and something relevant to the United States as we talk about the rise of fascism, is that perhaps understandably, many Jewish folk in Amsterdam, they tried to cooperate with the Nazis because they were trying to save their own skin. I also saw his dramatization of the Nazi Blitz of London in the early 1940s. The movie is called Blitz. It traces the fictional story of this young Black youth who is separated from his parents and engages in this picaresque tour of London during the Blitz. It never ceases to amaze me how Steve McQueen can amass these huge film budgets. I mean, this is a major motion picture production financed by Apple TV. It's in theaters, but it'll be on Apple by the end of the month. LKJ, Linton Kwesi Johnson, has a small role in this film. The Gil Scott Heron, if you like, of Black Britain. I recommend Blitz, like I recommend all of Steve McQueen's work. I mean, you recall 12 Years a Slave, I'm sure. Perhaps you recall the Viola Davis vehicle, Widows, with Liam Neeson, filmed in Chicago. And I also screened this documentary, Soundtrack of a Coup d'etat, which is tremendous. The backdrop is the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, 1961, the role of U.S. imperialism, and the attempt to manipulate Black American artists like Louis Armstrong, who was sent to Congo late 1960 as a sort of cover for the nefarious activities of U.S. intelligence agents at that time. The film culminates not only with the singer known as Abbey Lincoln in her performance with her then partner Max Roach in her scream against the tyranny of what happened, but also there's remarkable footage of Black Americans breaking into the United Nations as there's a debate on the Congo and engaging in fisticuffs with the security. It's a remarkable scene. The only downside there.
Can I cut you about there? There was women that lived there. Maya Angelou, a Trinidadian sister, Aminata Maseka, Abby Lincoln. Yeah.
Oh no, there were brothers as well, I should say. But to my dismay, I've written about this as a matter of fact. They barred from participation Ben Davis, the Black communist leader, presumably on anti-communist grounds, which obviously doesn't make any sense because you have the Soviets pounding the rostrum, denouncing U.S. imperialism about what has befallen Patrice Lumumba, the Black Americans breaking into the General Assembly, but then banning Black communists, I guess because they're too close to the Soviets. I mean, it's part of the political miseducation, I'm afraid to say, that is too often characterized this country. And then I saw Dahomey, which deals with repatriation of art and artifacts plundered by the French at the end of the 19th century and then returned to the country we now know as Benin in the 21st century. Of course, a number of Black Americans tried to block the repatriation because they said that the West African leaders at that time were complicit in the slave trade. So I guess that means that they did not deserve to have their artifacts returned to them. It's interesting. I mean, I recommend Dahomey. And since I'm doing reviews, let me mention one more point. I'm in the middle of reading the book entitled The First and Last King of Haiti, The Rise and Fall of Henri Christophe, or Henry Christophe. It is remarkable. As a matter of fact, I'm going to interview the author in a few weeks. And if she consents, I'm going to ask her a potentially embarrassing question, which is, do you feel that your book now has supplanted the book by C.L.R. James, Black Jacobins? The book is that well researched and that informative. I say it again. The First and Last King of Haiti, The Rise and Fall of Henri Christophe, or Henry Christophe. It's worth a peek.
Can I ask you this question, Dr. Horne? Christophe, was he born in Grenada? Where was he born? He was not born in Haiti.
Yeah, he was born in Grenada as a young boy. He was dispatched by the French to the Battle of Savannah in Georgia. That was circa 1779, if not mistaken. And even though he's on the cover, the book is ostensibly about him, the book is really about the Haitian Revolution, the aftermath of the Haitian Revolution, the attempt by the French to exterminate the Africans, genocide. They failed. That's one of the reasons why there was retaliatory violence against the French. The story of Polish defectors, that is to say, brought over by the French but defecting to the African side. The use of gas chambers by the French to engage in mass execution of Black people. It's quite a story. And once again, I recommend it.
Once again, I just wanted to say that I saw that Savannah, Georgia. I've been to Savannah, Georgia, and there's actually a statue of Christophe in Savannah. That's the hometown of a young friend of mine, former comrade. He's still in the land of the living. Modibo Kadali, E.C. Cooper. Yeah, I guess you probably know Cooper, don't you, Dr. Horne?
It rings a bell.
Okay, now can we talk about the Russia-African summit?
Well, sure. As I mentioned, Russia's in the catbird seat right now because India is appealing to Russia in case India runs afoul of China. Right now, they have an entente. Obviously, China wants to have good relations with Russia because U.S. imperialism wants to flip Russia against China, and I don't think that's going to work for reasons already mentioned. And now you have Mr. Trump trying to curry favor with Russia. I don't think that's going to work and probably will lead back to the failed Biden policy of double containment, trying to contain both Russia and China. And in this context, in the last few days, there's been yet another Russia-Africa summit. Russia, as you know, has been a friend of the alliance of Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. It has good relations with South Africa. It has good relations with Zimbabwe. And so this is part of the news that if we had more visionary leadership in Black America, perhaps our Black Canadian friends can pull their coat, we could take advantage of this. But right now, it does not seem to be in the offing.
And you are listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. You want to continue, Melinda?
Yes. What's next on the list? Hold on a sec. What do we have on deck? You want to talk about APEC in Peru?
Well, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, the multilateral organization that brings together under one roof on a yearly basis nations as diverse as the United States, China, Indonesia, Australia, Canada, of course. I can't remember if Prime Minister Trudeau made it to Lima. But the big news out of Lima is this major Chinese port that's about to open, which is going to transform trade between South America and China. I think I mentioned weeks ago that now the idea is to build a highway from Brazil, which, as you know, abuts the Atlantic Ocean, all the way across the continent to this port in Lima, or actually just outside of Lima, that abuts the Pacific Ocean. And an idea of which way the winds are blowing is the flip-flopping of President Milei of Argentina, who, when he was running for office, was denouncing China. But now that he's in office, he's purring like a pussycat when it comes to dealings with Beijing. Although, of course, he was just in Mar-a-Lago visiting Mr. Trump just a few days ago. So, you have to watch this guy like a hawk. But as I've said before, part of the problem with Argentina is that they still have bad relations with the UK over the Falklands War of the early 1980s, which helped to bring down the military junta in Argentina. The Falklands or the Malvinas is still under the Union Jack. Mr. Milei would like that to change. I doubt if you'll get the support of U.S. imperialism with regard to that. So he's sort of stuck. I mean, this is what happens when you're unprincipled and a demagogue. I mean, you campaign against China and then have to make overtures to China. You try to curry favor with U.S. imperialism, but then can't get them to turn their back on their poodle in London. But in any case, Mr. Biden and President Xi Jinping met the other day. Of course, Mr. Biden is on his way out. He's a lame duck. And perhaps the sooner he exits, the better.
I'm going to throw you a curveball since we're talking about the whole international situation. In 1969, well, we just lost Roy Haynes, the drummer Roy Haynes, who was a musician of Bajan background, but he and Archie Shepp performed at the Pan-African, the Pan-African meeting, which took place in Algiers in 1969, and and the Panthers later on, the Panthers had an embassy there, so on and so forth. Do you think that's a good example of Africans in America, not just Africans in America, but Africans in the diaspora and Africans on the continent coming together, particularly the so-called Arabs, because there's a split between some of the nationalists and black nationalists in America say that we should not have anything to do with the Arabs or Palestinians.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that, particularly the rather scalding analyses of the late John Henry Clark, formerly of Harlem and the City University of New York. I mean, Black Americans, we're staring down the barrel of fascism right now. And so we need all the allies that we can get, all the allies that we can muster. And once again, let me reignite this proposal about meeting in Havana or Ottawa. And I would imagine that we would invite some of our Arab friends, particularly from Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, particularly from the communist parties of Iraq, for example, other left-wing forces such as the Tudor Party of Iran, Persia, for example. So I sort of know where these people are coming from, and certainly to reiterate the vote of some of our Arab friends in Michigan, voting to install a crusader, no less, Islamophobe, as head of the U.S. military. And there's another footnote, too, which is that, once again, our so-called allies like Senator Sanders and others, who I won't mention because I would be considered to be punching down if I were to denounce them. They're profiting handsomely from writing books denouncing wokeness, diversity, equity, inclusion, critical race theory. These are people on the left. And yet Pete Hegseth, the crusader, the Islamophobe, who will be Mr. Trump's Secretary of Defense, he's planning to purge what he calls woke generals, starting with the black man who heads the U.S. military right now, C.Q. Brown, so that when the U.S. military is unleashed in the streets of Michigan, that they won't be woke and won't be upset by observing orders that may be illegal and unconstitutional. In other words, folks on the left are beating the drum, providing momentum for this Islamophobe crusader, Pete Hegseth. This is what I mean. It's hard to say whether it's ignorance or dishonesty?
Exactly. When you talk about folks on the left, are you talking about the Socialist Workers Party, Communist Party? There used to be a Maoist group, PO, the Progressive Labor Party. The so-called Stalinists, so-called Trotskyists, and the so-called Maoists. Is that the left you're talking about?
Well, let me be specific, since as I said, I was trying to avoid mentioning these individual names. But if you look in bookstores right now, the son of the formidable Michael Parenti, I'm speaking of Christian Parenti, he has a book denouncing wokeness. Norman Finkelstein, who is otherwise sound on questions of anti-Zionism, he's veered in the same direction. And the thing about Norman is that he really overestimates his intelligence. I mean, I don't know if you realize it's typical Euro-American man. They think they know everything, I guess because they live in an imperialist country. I mean, there's a debate involving Norman and the UCLA historian Robin Kelly and the Black feminist scholar Barbara Smith, people who devoted their lives to studying Black history. Norman's never written anything about Black history, and then he's trying to put himself forward as sort of an expert. It's I don't know if it's insulting or disgusting, perhaps both.
Well, I find that to be kind of very strange, because Michael Parenti has been to Toronto many times, invited by yours truly and the organizations that I represented. But I would be interested to see how Mr. Parenti, I would think that he might be disagreeing with his son, don't you think?
Well, hey, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get into people's business. But Christian Parenti also, his previous book was lauding Alexander Hamilton, who, of course, has been the subject of this Disney come Broadway extravaganza, saluted by the Obamas and Dick Cheney. The great Paramount Black intellectual Ishmael Reed got the receipts and exposed Alexander Hamilton as an enslaver. And so, if Michael Parenti disagrees with his son, maybe, he should make that known.
Yeah.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. We're speaking to Dr. Gerald Horne, the author of his current book, Armed Struggle, Panthers and Communists, Black Nationalists and Liberals in Southern California through the 60s and 70s. Any more questions, Melinda?
Do we want to go to the G20 in Brazil?
Yes, it'll be opening. What's interesting about the G20, supposedly it came into existence because the group of seven, led by the United States and its comrades in Canada, Western Europe, Japan, were losing altitude. And so they organized a larger formation, the group of 20, with the Saudis, the South Africans, et al. But what's happened is that basically the G20 has two caucuses. There's the North Atlantic Caucus, led by U.S. imperialism, and then there's the BRICS Caucus, which is moving ahead with remarkable velocity and speed, recently adding to its ranks Uganda, Nigeria, not to mention Egypt and Ethiopia. As a matter of fact, I've been warning Black Americans that rather than confronting the double consciousness articulated by W.E.B. Du Bois, that is to say, two warring ideals in one body, one U.S., one Black, we're going to have to confront the 21st century double allegiances, because the BRICS right now are poised to overtake U.S. imperialism and are poised to move ahead with de-dollarization, going to have tremendous impact on the U.S. economy. And what will be the position of Black Americans? That is to say, will they stand with South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, Uganda, Nigeria, or will they not? And the fact that that's an open question speaks volumes
Well, don't you think that's going to be like people like the African People's Socialist Party will take a certain position and the NAACP will take another position?
Well, sure, but I'm thinking that sadly, the bulk of the Black community likely will tail after the NAACP and the Congressional Black Caucus, if history is any guide. And once again, before time expires, let me reignite the proposal to have an international conference in Ottawa and or Havana, the immediate agenda item being halting the deportation of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Haitians and also those of Mexican ancestry. It would be a global breakthrough if we're able to execute this. And let me also say that the stocks implicated in the prison industrial complex of the United States, speaking of GEO in the first instance, their stock is going through the roof. They're expected to build these detention centers. I dare say that if they are used for Haitians and Mexicans after they're deported, they'll come for the rest of us. Let me also say that there's a movement in the United States to have denaturalization. Actually, some of your audience, perhaps even the host of Diasporic Music, want to listen to this because if it starts in the United States, it might cross the border. That is to say, those who have U.S. nationality can have their nationality stripped away and sent back to wherever they came from. This is on the agenda, folks.
Yeah. Well, I'm not laughing at that to be laughing, but that actually happened to another one of our comrades who was in Toronto before Marvin X. They did a number on Marvin X, who's still in the land of the living. He's in San Francisco. He might even be listening to this show right now.
He was denaturalized.
At one time, yes. From
Canada.
No. From they tried to from the United States.
Oh, I see.
He went through a big struggle. He was in Belize for a minute, and Marvin has written his history in a lot of books. Yeah, but no, he's in Oakland right now. But I'm just saying he went through many changes.
Well, after what the baseball pitchers say, after a called third strike on a batter that they're facing, they say, you don't have to go home, but you're going to have to get up on out of here, out of the batter's box. And that's what the right wing is about to tell a number of our brothers and sisters. You don't necessarily have to go back to Africa or the Caribbean, but you're going to have to go somewhere.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah. Well, again, I started to say you can go to Belize, but that's part of the Caribbean, yeah. So I don't know where you're going to go, or where we're going to go.
A sober
I think we have run out of time.
Which to conclude.
And I thank you for your contribution per usual, and I would like to thank Lisa Watson for teching today, keeping us on time and keeping us sounding good. And Melinda Francis, you have any concluding thoughts?
I will see everybody in the whirlwind, and I believe that there is a rally, so stay tuned for that.
We state these facts only to let you know that those of us who are revolutionary, Pan-Africanists, is not because we love revolution. It is historically determined, and we have no alternative but to follow history and to use history for the benefit of our people.